How did OnePlus go from making crazy high-value devices running custom software to creating one of, if not the best Android phones in 2024? Let's talk about that. Hey guys, I'm Ryan Thomas, and these two devices are more or less 10 years apart, the OnePlus One and the OnePlus 12. But while they look relatively similar in that they're both candy bar style phones and they have that blacked out theming, they aren't that far off in size either. They are fundamentally two very different phones with completely contrasting strategies. The year is 2014 and two guys, Carl Pei and Pete Lau, leave Chinese powerhouse Oppo to co-found a new mobile phone company called OnePlus. How did they go about launching their debut phone? By creating an invite-only system to manufacture a level of exclusivity and elusiveness to the company's first phone, the OnePlus One. The only way you'll be able to get your hands on one of these things was by entering competitions, begging on social media, and essentially just praying that you got the coveted invitation via your email. This unprecedented strategy made headlines in the tech space, and the phone wasn't too bad either. The company clearly pointed this new phone towards enthusiasts. It was sold exclusively online, came with high-end tech specs but none of the external flair that mainstream smartphones might have employed to entice your average Joe. And running the show was a custom version of Android called CyanogenOS, a spin-off of the popular Cyanogen mod ROM that many enthusiasts, including myself, were flashing to their phones to improve the experience. The concept was simple: strip back all of the bloat that was plaguing LG's, Samsung's and Sony's devices at the time and offer additional customization functionality to make the whole experience your own. The OnePlus One was an enthusiast's phone, and this concept, albeit without the elaborate artificial scarcity bit, would continue as a theme throughout the next handful of devices, such as the two that debuted the company's signature alert slider. The X, which was a budget-conscious model, the 3 and the 3T. The 3 in particular stood out with its premium-feeling metal casing and super-fast 20-watt dash charge setup that topped up the phone from 0 to 60% in just half an hour, at a time where the Galaxy S7 Edge topped out at just 15 watts but cost almost double the price. The next couple of years would bring about the 5 and the 5T, which fundamentally didn't change much of the formula. The former felt like a natural progression from its predecessor, and the 5T actually stretched the display to fall more in line with the trends set by the likes of LG and Samsung. These phones were still metal in their build, with super speedy specs and software, which at this point was OxygenOS and not CyanogenOS. These phones still compromised fairly heavily in the camera performance to meet the aggressive prices though, so they weren't considered real flagship competition. It could be argued that the OnePlus 6 was the last phone the company released with its focus on the enthusiast, in that it was still affordable, offered a headphone port, and had a real focus on speed, both in day-to-day performance but also charging. On the other hand, it was the first OnePlus model to creep over that $500 mark. And the 6T iterated on the 6, but dropped the headphone port, and the 7 felt like a simply reskinned 6T. It wasn't even available in the US at the time. Because what did come was the 7 Pro, a phone that many enthusiasts would call the GOAT. Why? Because it brought a super high resolution, high refresh rate display with no notch or punch hole. It came with 3 different camera focal lengths on the back, and it was clear that this phone was OnePlus's first attempt at a true flagship, taking on the out-and-out best of the best. It was a statement and a clear shift or fork in strategy from the once super aggressively priced spec machines of early OnePlus. This was a $670 phone that looked like something out of a sci-fi film. But the issue was that despite the looks, the 7 Pro still fell behind in camera performance compared to the competition, omitted wireless charging, and an IP rating, features that were already staples in many flagships years prior. And its successor, the 7T Pro, was just another iteration of the phone that came before it, with no meaningful changes to the design or functionality. For the T line this time around, the more interesting phone was actually the base 7T, due to it being a considerable improvement over the base 7. It had extra lenses on the back in this new circular camera housing, a revised design, a faster charging at now 30 watts. It also brought a higher refresh rate display in the 90Hz flavour to the cheaper model, now costing $600. But despite being the more affordable of the two in the 70 series, OnePlus was still not making a particularly affordable phone, or at least one you might consider calling a flagship killer. By 2020, OnePlus was edging closer to the flagships with its 8 Pro, a now $900 phone that features a bigger 120Hz display, all the high-end specs, a revised design that arguably brought it more in line with the mainstream phones and less like a futuristic piece of tech. It also brought wireless charging for the first time on a OnePlus at a whopping 30 watts, no less. The 8 Pro was such a crazy departure from what made the original so great. This phone was big, full of specs and features, and cost near enough as much as the competition from Samsung and Apple. But then OnePlus dropped this. The Nord was the first in a long line of budget or high-value smartphones from the company, except unlike the original OnePlus phones that made the company great arguably, that packed in super speedy specs and then compromised everywhere else, the Nord was just a standard mid-ranger with mid-range specs, but wasn't exactly cheap at just under $500 for the base model that launched outside of India. So not exactly a flagship killer, but also not a super premium phone, nor a hyper budget one. A confusing one, for sure, and made seemingly worse by the fact that one of the faces of the company and the co-founder, Carl Pei, decided to depart OnePlus, and though he hasn't shared anything on this matter since, and this is purely speculation and conjecture on my part, I think it could have been to do with the Nord and the upcoming 8T, 9 and possibly 10 series phones feeling like such a far cry from the ideas that OnePlus was built on. Because the launches between and including the 8T, which looked and felt so much like the Nord it was ridiculous, all the way through to the 10T were a mixture of disappointment, underwhelming and downright boring. None of these words were what you'd normally associate with OnePlus way back when. This was a little dark age for OnePlus, and at least to me, it felt like it went on forever. When the OnePlus 11 rolled around, it looked a little different to its predecessors. Sure, it was still a product of the company trying to create something to compete at the top with Samsung, Apple and Google in the high end. It had all the bells and whistles that you might expect from a flagship phone, and though the speed issues had long been a thing of the past on pretty much every other phone, OnePlus made its phone stand out with two key things: battery life and camera improvements. OnePlus had been in a partnership with the legendary company Hasselblad since 2021, with its colour science having come out in the OnePlus 9 and 9 Pro, but we really started to feel the effects of this in the 11 in 2023. Now, the 11's cameras certainly weren't beating the likes of Google, Samsung and Apple at the very top, but it was clear that OnePlus was on its way and had really focused on dialing in the colours and tonal capture, which were areas that OnePlus phones had struggled with for a long time, despite actually including improved sensors and lenses in the recent models. And then out of nowhere, OnePlus released this thing. The Open was a large screen foldable that many at the time thought might not be able to compete with Samsung and its well-established Z Fold series, but boy were we all wrong. Not only was the Open exceptional in performance and build quality as you might expect at this point, but it handily beat its contemporaries in areas we'd not seen OnePlus really excel at before: long-term battery life, screen quality, and camera performance that to this day is still the best in a foldable smartphone. At $1,500, it was by no means a cheap phone, but it was competitively priced for what it was, and things were only going to get better from here. In early 2024, OnePlus launched two phones in its 12 series that, despite looking pretty similar on the surface, were aimed at two very different types of customers: the OnePlus 12 and the 12R. The former is still OnePlus's flagship to compete with the likes of the S24 Plus and Ultra, iPhone 15 Plus and 15 Pro, and Google Pixel 8 Pro. It follows the formula of offering crazy specs, mega battery life, really good camera performance, and great build quality, and is priced accordingly, having debuted at $800. Not exactly crazy money, but it's still a pricey phone. The 12R, on the other hand, is firmly and clearly a flagship killer, in the ilk of those great phones that came before it. Top specs, very good screen, excellent battery life, with compromises in its camera performance and software support going long term. The 12R's price is kind of tricky because over here in the UK it's really expensive at £650. It's a bargain in the US though at just under $500. That means that in America, this is a proper flagship killer once again. The 12 series proved that OnePlus could do both. It could make a proper out and out flagship killer that it used to do back in the day, but also complement it with a top shelf flagship smartphone worthy of competing with the best of the best, something that it'd been aiming to do for the longest time and just falling short. This phone nails it. These two phones are symbols of a young enthusiast company looking to make its mark in the ever-growing market, and an established brand that's found its footing and is proving to an increasing number of people that it can do more than just make spec monsters. What do you guys think of OnePlus? Let me know in the comments section. And while you're down there, do hit like if you enjoyed today's content and subscribe to never miss another upload. I've been Ryan Thomas, and I'll catch you later. Cheers.